Welcome to the world of Scandinavian flat plane figure carving, and thank you for your interest in this style of art and carving itself. This style of carving was started in the early 1900s. The main character that was working inside this, the main carver, was a guy named Axel Peterson out of Sweden, and he did something that was never done before, which was he used very, very simple cuts and very few cuts to create his characters, and thus the Scandinavian flat plane style was born. Its heyday really was in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. By the 1960s, our main mentor here in the United States, Mr. Harley Refsal, Professor Harley Refsal, had seen these characters in Scandinavia, in Norway, when he was there on a trip, and fell in love with these little characters and brought a few home. And his passion for these characters has never waned. By the 60s, 70s, and then 80s, a lot of the carvers were actually starting to disappear, and they weren't carving anymore. Well, disappear, of course, they were unfortunately just dying off. And Harley resurrected this style. He gave it life again and has been teaching this style ever since. So we want to thank Mr. Harley Refsal, Professor Harley Refsal, for his dedication to this art form. All right, and from me and all the little guys here, I say welcome to the world of Scandinavian figure carving. All right, let's take a look at this and see what these characters are all about. The characters themselves and the style really got its phrase from, or got its name from the cuts that are present on the face of the sculpture. They're long, broad, flat cuts. The corners are sharp and edged with a knife. You only use a knife in this style. It's very rare that you would actually use anything but a knife, and that is one of the kind of challenges of the Scandinavian flat plane carver, is to carve using one tool, a knife. In that world, we call it one tool proficiency. This little character is a character that I was doing a series of characters that were based on little old men with canes. The classic Scandinavian characters are little old men and little old ladies. Here I've got, and of course a few Tomten and things like this, Nissi, cultural pieces. Here's a character as well. You can really see on his character, as the light comes down and hits us, you can see the long, broad, flat cuts, heavy push cuts, pull cuts. There are some good aggressive V cuts in there, maybe one or two little chip cuts, and that make up our character. This was a character inside of a series, of course, where you called them the smoking men, where they were all smoking. And this one, he's got his hands behind his back. So in the last few years, I've really pushed to try to get some different, because wood is static, and the nature of what we carve, the material itself, is very straight, flat, and most carvers start with very straight and flat characters, but I'm now moving into a little more motion movement, etc. Here's another character in that same series. I actually added, two. So he's got a cane and he's got his little smoking pipe, whatever. And there is, again, an example. Up in the light, you can see those long, broad, flat cuts, big, heavy V cuts, and some strong chip cuts, we'll say. All right, a lot of carvers use different terminologies, but those are the ones that we're going to introduce to you guys in this video. All right, there's one other character. One thing to note is the deeper the cut, the more light will play with the sculpture and the character. So as you are carving and gaining proficiency in your carving, go after your characters with a little more intensity, with fewer cuts to get the desired result, but deeper cuts to get some light play on the sculpture itself. All right, and then we have some painted examples that we'll look at. Here's a little Tomten, or Nissi. He's a guy that lives out in the barn. And again, there's all kinds of variations of this. This was one that I created for the Vesterheim for a class that people could choose to take. And if you were to take that, thanks so much again for your interest, but you can try these little characters out on your own. He's got very, very strong flat push and pull cuts. He's got some simple chip cuts on him, or V cuts, that help with detail like folds in clothing, beard, and so on. And again, all these cuts are made with a knife. The painting style in this art form, in the figure carving, is typically watered down or what's called a paint wash. And then over the top of the characters, we would paint the colors that you want, but you'd thin them down with water so that they wash in and kind of muted colors. Not very bright colors are used. Well, bright colors are used, but they're muted or washed down. Here's another character I made for, well, the COVID season, trying to bring these characters into the 21st century with what's going on at the time. Again, you see a lot of these little guys or gals that look like they could be from the past, but this guy is a little old man that could be from now with wearing his little COVID mask. And again, you can see the flat, simple cuts. This is not, we have to say this, it's not whittling. You can't say that this has been whittled. This would be an example of flat plane carving, and it's in a very true form where the cuts are strong, they're deep, they're flat, giving this character, and it's really 3 simple cuts on an arm, for example, gives the illusion of roundness. So in the Scandinavian world, we say that that's round right there. All right, well, anyway, and you can see his paint all nice and washed. We can kind of see through, see the wood grain and so on. All right, so let's take a look at, if you really want to do this, you guys, this is what you need to do. You need to focus or practice on the cuts. And I'm going to introduce 3 of them. I'm going to say there's 3 main cuts. I'm going to lump 2 of them together, and then we'll show the other 2 as we go. Okay, so for safety purposes, we put on our safety glove. Mine's a little beat on. I'm embarrassed about it, but it's, I've got a couple fresh ones waiting for their turn. I've got a knife. It's a pre-sharpened knife. This is a classic example of a Scandinavian flat plane knife. What you see before you is what's called a flat-bladed carving knife. It has a back strap that's fairly thick, so making for a rigid knife, so it won't flex or bend in the cut, but it has a big face or profile, about a 1/2 inch face on that knife, so it'll give you nice sharp cuts. All right, I just put a polish on it, so we should be ready to go. All right, so this is what I would like to show tonight, and that's this, a practice stick. These practice sticks I am using in my classes to introduce the cuts for Scandinavian flat plane carving and introduce some of the ideology behind it as well. Again, these cuts right here, a whittler would take more, but the Scandies would cut very few cuts and say that's, in the Scandinavian world, that is round right there, that is round. Okay, all right, so the cuts that we make at the top, for example, making a ball, that is end grain cuts, and that is anything that you'd use on the head of a character. And that's, of course, where the end grain is. The spiral cuts that we make in the body, that is any kind of cut that would be coming across the grain on our characters' beards, arms, legs, and so on. So this is a good practice for those type of cuts that you make. The stacked rings on the bottom, are for examples of, or repetition of, cuts that you could make for folds in the clothes, maybe down by the boots or shoes of our characters, the pant of the character, the jackets on the characters. Those kind of cuts are good examples of that. All right, so these practice sticks that I'm going to show, here's another one that's a little bit different. It's got just a few more cuts on it. You can see as we hold it there in the light, you can see there's a few more cuts on it, just a bunch of V cuts. And of course, that's great. Here is another practice stick. So you can start to do a little more unique things with these. But again, these are heavier, bigger V cuts. And then there's some plunge cuts up here. We will probably get into that in maybe a different video. So different things you can do with practice sticks. All right, here you go. Let's throw some chips. So our video is all about this practice stick. Okay, so number 1 cut that you have to master as a Scandinavian carver is called a push cut. A push cut is you get behind the knife and you push it forward. I'd like everybody to note that I'm pushing with my opposite thumb. I've got my glove on my hand. I'm being safe. I've got the practice stick in my hand where it is. I'm holding on the bottom half and I'm pushing the knife away. All right, so here we go. Practice stick. Oh, I got into a little end grain or, well, different grain on that. So we're going to turn this and go the other way. And that happens. Chip outs, blowouts. That's just part of being a carver and learning the grain. All right, so we're going to be cutting off any machine marks. And we will also be, turn this way, we will also be knocking off the edges, as the Scandinavians say, and affectionately you would say, knock off the edges. So what is an edge? An edge, of course, is the physical edge of the material, and we're going to knock that down. But again, a whittler would take this material down, turn this way so I can go with the grain. A whittler would take this, very, very small cuts. The Scandi carver will take this in very strong cuts. Okay, this is called a push cut. We're behind the knife and we're pushing the knife through the material. Now, if you get into a situation where you've kind of got some you've got some grain that isn't cooperating, you might have to turn the knife and bring the knife back toward you. All right, so this is called a pull cut. And these pull cuts are considered, well, some people see them as unsafe. But a pull cut is safe when you do this. For example, at the bottom, when the knife is coming toward my thumb, I've got some pressure on the end so the wood doesn't slip. But if I drop my thumb be underneath and let the knife go over the top, then I feel like that could be a pretty safe cut. All right, so I'm going to speed up the process here. And it's not going to be the magic of fast forward. I'm just going to carve it up a little quicker. All right, there we go. This is our practice stick that we introduced. Push cuts and pull cuts. All right, there it is. In our world, the Scandi world, that's round. Look at that awesome cut. It's got some great lines to it. It's got some great light coming down, hitting these different cuts. You can really see the cuts themselves. So, okay, there's the start of roundness in our practice blank or practice stick. At the top, we're going to be doing a pull cut, and we're just going to round over the top. And there we go. And then we're going to do a V-cut. We're going to introduce what's called a V-cut. A V-cut is nothing more than taking the knife, presenting it to the wood, and holding it at a 45-degree angle. So get away from the 90, hold it at 45, and make a cut at the top. Turn your knife, make a cut at the bottom. I did not use a pencil, I'm just doing this by eye. But right there, I created a separation between the top, the ball, and the stick itself. All right, and again, in the Scandi world, that's round right there. Nobody believes it, but it's true. Down here, we can do something similar. We can practice our pull cuts. We are going to practice we've already practiced our push cut, and now we're gonna get a little more work with our V cut. All right. And you can see I'm trying to do this in as few cuts as possible to get the desired result. My knife is sharp. I am putting fairly good pressure behind it. But I tell you, I started carving with an X-Acto knife, and it just was not the thing to do. I'm gonna make a few extra cuts. We saw some examples here. I'm just gonna put some V cuts here that could replicate cuts that you might make on clothing, folds. This is actually, I'm just doing this right now, kind of freestyle. I did not plan to do this, but I think that's actually pretty cool. And there's some cuts that you can make that look like, folds in clothes. All right, so this angled cut that goes across, again, an angled cut would be any cut that we make on an arm, on a leg, anything that goes across the grain. And practice, that's why the practice stick is called a practice stick. You need to practice these cuts. Again, I'm gonna just freestyle kind of a practice stick. I'm gonna turn it and say, you know what, instead of following the line, I'm going to start a new cut on this edge, and I'm getting good repetition. Eventually, repetition. Practice makes perfect. I'm getting down here toward my hand and not feeling too safe down here, so maybe I can turn the material around, get a good grip on the majority of the material, and then resume my cutting and feeling a little safer. All right, and I'll just do this all the way around. And when I am done, I will have a nice practice stick. I'm learning about holding my knife. I'm learning about cutting the correct cuts, push cuts, pull cuts, V cuts. So we're going to say those are 3 that we're going to discuss today. There are more cuts that you can do and more cuts that you can use, but these are the basic ones. And if you learn these, you can be a Scandinavian flat plane carver as well. All right, thank you for your interest in this video. Thank you for your interest in our characters. Again, practice stick. This one's a little, well, free form. We did what we want, but again, you can make these practice sticks any way you want them to be. All right, thanks everybody. Good luck carving. Love to see you out there carving. Post your supplies, materials, post your finished carvings. That'd be awesome. I've never met a carver that won't share their work. All right, thanks everybody.